Hi, I'm Ricardo Hausmann. I'm here in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. I'm super happy to be part of this seminar series in Steamboat, and I'll be talking about technology and about the energy transition and about how we can prosper in a world that wants to decarbonize.
Good evening and welcome to the fourth of our 5 seminars offered in this, the 23rd season of Seminars at Steamboat. From the feedback we've received so far, the 3 talks that we've had to date have been very well received in the Steamboat community. And tonight we are delighted to present Dr. Ricardo Hausmann, the director of the Harvard University Growth Lab and a professor of practice at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, who will be addressing the environmental, social, and economic impacts of adopting green energy technologies. The sustainable energy alternatives and the technologies that support them have come a long way in the last decade. The cost of installation has been reduced dramatically, and they have become an increasingly competitive and important part of the nation's energy supply. But they are also not without controversy, particularly in the current environment where there is a stated preference for continuing to pursue fossil fuel energy sources. In addition, just within the past week, as you may know, the EPA has proposed a dramatic rule change that would revoke the 2009 endangerment finding that defined carbon dioxide as a pollutant that the EPA could regulate in terms of vehicle emissions and among other things. If carbon is no longer considered a pollutant and it cannot be regulated, how will this affect the further adoption of green technologies that are intended to move us toward a zero carbon economy and prevent catastrophic climate change? These are among the many questions that we are eager to hear Professor Hausmann speak about tonight. As most of you will know, the mission of Seminars at Steamboat is to present nonpartisan talks on a range of current public policy topics and issues, both domestic and international. The board of directors of Seminars strives each year to present an eclectic mix of topics, all of them focused on important and timely issues that are currently before the nation. And I might note that the topic for our final seminar next week certainly meets that criteria. We will hear next Monday from Professor Samuel Issacharoff, who is a distinguished constitutional law scholar at New York University, at the New York University Law School. And he will be addressing the constitutional underpinnings of democracy and the role of the courts. For the new attendees in the audience, a reminder that there will be a Q&A at the conclusion of the talk tonight, and you are invited to submit questions throughout the talk using your smartphone, either by following the directions shown behind me, or you can use the QR code that's on the back of the program. And since we cannot ask you, therefore, to turn off your cell phones, may I ask that you put them on silent mode. Second, video recordings of all seminars are available usually 2 or 3 days after the event by going to the seminar's website, and they are also posted on YouTube. And we encourage you to share the link to these recordings with your friends and others, perhaps even outside of the Steamboat area, so that these programs can get better known. Podcasts of all the seminars are also made available on the Northern Colorado National Public Radio station, KUNC. Finally, and most importantly, on behalf of the Board of Directors of Seminars at Steamboat, I want to express our sincere thanks and appreciation to everyone who helps to support this activity, and the sponsors, the co-sponsors, and other donors, because you help make this unique discussion possible. Your support enables us to continue to bring these seminars to Steamboat each summer and without charging admission. The sponsor of this week's seminar is the Yampa Valley Community Foundation, and the co-sponsors are Emily and Todd Seaver and Lana and Joe Turner. Let's give them a round of applause. As I said, donations help keep seminars free of charge, and you can contribute by going to the seminar's website, or you can now also use Venmo, and there's a QR code conveniently located on your program to help you do that. And if you or your organization is interested in sponsoring or co-sponsoring one of the events next summer, there is information under the donate area of our website about how to do that. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator of tonight's session, Professor Rafael Perez. Dr. Perez is a member of the Board of Directors of Seminars at Steamboat, and he is an associate professor of business at Colorado Mountain College right here in Steamboat. Before joining CMC, he was an economist and senior research associate at the University of Texas, El Paso for 4 years, where he worked on projects on electric road systems, among other things. Please join me in welcoming Rafael Perez, who will introduce tonight's speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mitch, and thanks, everyone, for being here. So, I want to introduce the speaker for this afternoon. We are honored to have Dr. Ricardo Hausmann. Professor Hausmann is the founder and director of Harvard's Growth Lab and the Rafik Hariri Professor of the Practice of International Political Economy at Harvard Kennedy School. He developed several influential economic concepts and methodologies, such as growth diagnostics and economic complexity, which have been published in top academic journals and cited over 56,000 times. Professor Hausmann has held prominent positions in both academia and government, and also in international agencies, including serving as the first chief economist of the Inter-American Development Bank. I invite you to read more about him at your programs. So he will be presenting on the timely topic of the positive and negative impact of green energy technologies, associated public policy issues and challenges. Please join me in welcoming with a round of applause to Ricardo Hausmann.
Well, good evening, good evening. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. I don't know why you are here, because it's so beautiful out there. But I'm honored that you thought it would maybe be useful for you to listen to me. I'm a development economist, if you want. I worry about how to make places more prosperous. And we want to make places more prosperous, but we have this issue of climate change. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where is my thinking about how to make places more prosperous, and then what's the intersection of that with climate change, okay? Let us get started. The question of prosperity sort of was right there at the birth of the economic science. Adam Smith wrote this book, The Origin of the Wealth of Nations. That's the question, what makes countries rich, in 1776. In 1776, the richest country in the world was the Netherlands, which was about 4 times richer than the poorest countries in the world, which were many, because they were all just at subsistence. So the Netherlands was at 4 times subsistence. If you look around the world today, the poorest country in the world is, say, Burundi. If you multiply by 4 the income per capita of Burundi, which was the distance between the Netherlands and the poorest countries in the world, you multiply by 4 Burundi, you get to Haiti, which is the poorest country in the Americas. If you multiply by 4 Haiti, you get to Morocco. If you multiply by 4 Morocco, you get to Poland. And if you multiply by 4 Poland, you get to Singapore. So a problem that was a problem of 4 to 1 that got Adam Smith all excited has become a problem of 256 to 1, which is scientific proof that the problem does not go away by reading Adam Smith. Now, how could this have happened? Well, it's very simple. Why is it that you're able to take this picture on the left and take that picture on the right? Because if I put you as a homework assignment, go out and take a picture of a typewriter. What? Where would you find the typewriter? Right? In a museum, right? So, but because bad technologies get displaced by better technology, so why in the world are we still able to take these pictures? Right? So we now know a little bit better what happened. This is GDP per capita in the world since the year 0. And essentially, GDP per capita was flat forever until 200 years ago. This now looks like a hockey stick, if you want, right? But if you zoom into the last 200 years, something happened in some parts of the world that didn't happen in other parts of the world. So if you measure differences in income back in 1800 and 1776, where Adam Smith was writing, the gaps were very small. If you measure them now, the gaps are huge, okay? So this tells us a little bit about the puzzle of prosperity and how to generate it. Now, what is behind these large differences in income? You might say, well, is it energy, right? And well, if you look here, and you sort of do find energy because the guy on the left is using animal energy, and the guy on the right is using an internal combustion engine, right? And the history of humanity can be told a little bit like a history of energy. So here we're using human energy. It is probably inspired by the pharaohs and the pyramids and so on. Then we found animal energy. Then we found other sources of energy until we found how to burn things to thermodynamics and stuff, how to create energy out of things that generate heat. And that generated this incredible increase in energy production, which you actually see here. This is what happened to energy consumption over the last 200 years. And initially, there in the year 1800, it's all biomass. Then we added coal, then we added oil, then we added natural gas, right? And you see this incredible boom in energy use. And actually, this incredible use in energy use, here on the x-axis, you have how rich are countries, and in the y-axis, you have how much energy do they use. And there's a pretty good relationship. You tell me your income per capita, I'll tell you how much energy you use. You tell me how much energy you use, I'm going to guess your income per capita. I'll make some mistakes, but not big ones. I can sort of, these things go together, okay? So, what happened 200 years, what happened, say, 200 years ago or 150 years ago, or whenever it was, that we started burning coal, or we started burning oil, or we started burning natural gas? It's not that we invented the coal or the natural gas or the oil. They've been around for millions of years. What happened is we figured out how to transform those resources into energy. So it's not the availability of energy, it's the availability of the knowledge of how to mobilize that energy for our purpose. So it's not a revolution it's a revolution in ideas, right? So at the core of this transformation is something to do with ideas. So when you talk to economists, they tend to divide the world into some known characters. They like to tell stories where the typical characters are either capital or labor or education. They call it human capital and so on. They tell the stories with those characters. And that's a little bit like telling a very classical story. The Greeks believed that the world was made out of earth, water, air, and fire, right? These were the fundamental elements, and if you wanted to tell the story of the world, you would play around with those elements. I'm going to argue to you that actually the world, it's going to come as a surprise to you, the world is made out of atoms. Okay? And these atoms are like letters, right? These atoms, what's the difference in saying, earth, water, and fire and saying atoms? That these atoms combine. They gave rise to chemistry. Okay? They combine into molecules. And these molecules combine into more macromolecules that have other properties like biology. So suddenly we have biology, right? And then you put more of these macromolecules together and you have life. And then you put more of these life together, you get cute things like this. No, you put more of these cute things like this, you get other things like that, more social animals. And when you put enough animals together, it looks a little bit like this. So the point is that when things combine, the combination has properties that the underlying components didn't have. There's a stage in which the component is alive. I mean, the stuff together is alive. Its component elements are not alive, right? And there's a moment in which a brain is able to think and compute and so on, but a neuron cannot think and compute, right? So there's this emergence of new properties of these combinations. And that's what I want you to keep in mind. I'm going to elaborate on this, that combinations of ideas, combinations of knowledge and so on are going to be at the core of the story. So I'm going to tell a story in a different way. I'm going to say that the most important element in the economy is knowledge, right? Because humans cannot live in this world by just using what nature provides. I don't know if you know, but there's no such thing as a hamburger tree. If you want a hamburger, you need to transform nature from the way it is to the way you want it to be. And for that, to do that, you have to know how to do it. You have to know how to transform nature. And that knowledge is what powers the economy. Now, this knowledge is going to take three forms of existence, three instantiations, three kinds of, fancy word I'm going to use, ontologies, right? So the first one is that you can have knowledge that is embodied in tools, okay? So if you want to use the tool, you don't need to know how to make the tool. The knowledge of how to make the tool is in the tool, you just need to use the tool, right? So you're using embodied knowledge. Knowledge can also be codified knowledge in recipes, formulas, algorithms, how to do manuals, cookbooks, right? They live here in some symbolic space, right? So this is ink over paper, but it's not in the ink, it's not in the paper. Actually, this is not ink over paper, this is a picture of ink over paper, and it doesn't change the meaning, right? Because it lives in some symbolic space. Now, if this is all that there was, we would put the tools in a container and ship them to Burundi or to Haiti or whatever, right? And if it's all about the codes and the recipes, well, we could put them on the web and share them with everybody that has a cell phone. So now technology is flat, right? But there's a third element in this story, which you can get an intuition for, which has to do with the question, what do you do when your tooth hurts? You might say, well, let's download an article from the web and follow the instructions, right? I don't recommend it. You want to go to a dentist. Now, the dentist uses tools, the dentist follows protocols, but the dentist mixes the tool and the protocols with something most of you and I don't have, right? Which is the ability to look into the mouth and see things we wouldn't see, the ability to use the tools in ways that we wouldn't know. That thing exists in brains and only in brains. We call that know-how or tacit knowledge, okay? So the use of knowledge implies the use of three things: tools, recipes, and tacit knowledge in brains. But the problem is that this tacit knowledge in brains is not simple. It's not like information. You know, here is Rafa Nadal. I should update the presentation for Alcácer, but he knows how to play tennis. If I organize a conversation with Rafa Nadal, your tennis game will not improve. Okay? So it's something, Malcolm Gladwell says it takes 10,000 hours to become good at something. Okay? So, well, we don't have 10,000 hours to spare in our lives. 10,000 hours at 40 hours a week is 5 years. We don't have 5 chunks of 5 years to spare. That's one of the reasons why your dentist tends not to be your lawyer. Right? So, but the problem is that the knowledge we need in the world is not the knowledge of an individual. You might say, this person here knows how to implement that technology. But that would be wrong, because to implement that technology, you need all these other people who know different things that she might not know. So I'm going to argue that know-how is the slow-moving variable in this thing, and we have to think about what are the properties of this know-how. But to do that, I'm going to make first a thought experiment. I'm going to ask you a hypothetical question. I'm going to compare two individuals. Here's an Inuit from northern Canada. He is in the food industry. And here he is in the construction industry. And here he is in the transportation industry. And I'm going to compare him to modern man. And I'm going to ask who has more know-how. Okay? And the answer is uncomfortable, right? Because this guy, he uses glasses, headphones, shirts, watches, a screen, a computer. He has software here. He doesn't know how to make any of that. You put this guy here, there must be a mathematical theorem that says he dies, right? He'll either freeze to death or starve to death, but he's not going to make it. So it doesn't make any sense to say that this guy has more know-how than these guys. But it makes sense to say that the society to which this guy belongs knows how to make many more things than the society to which these guys belong. Because the society to which this guy belongs knows how to make glasses, shirts, headphones, etc., etc. Okay? So the punchline of this story is that societies know more, not because individuals know more, but because individuals know different. If people know different, the whole knows more. The division of knowledge is what allows the whole to know more. So, for example, if knowledge grows, and there's all sorts of evidence that knowledge has exploded over the last 500 years and so on. This is my employer, founded in 1636. 1636 was before Newton and physics, before Lavoisier and chemistry, before Thomas. No, not Thomas Aquinas. It was after Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes and Locke and Hume and whatever, it was before everyone, right? So there's much, much more to teach, right? So if you have more knowledge, you need more buildings. We started in this building, and now with more knowledge, you need more buildings, right? And more buildings, and now there's more buildings. Right? But in 1636, a college degree lasted 4 years. How long does a college degree last now? Still 4 years. We have much, much more to teach, but we don't have more time to teach it in, right? So that means that what we do is we put different bits of knowledge in different brains. We put different bits of knowledge in different brains. That's sort of like going back to the same idea. So I'm going to argue, I don't know how much knowledge fits in the brain. I don't know if it's a kilobyte, a terabyte, a megabyte, a gigabyte, I don't know what it is, so I'm going to call it a person byte. Okay? Now, so products are going to differ in how many person bytes they need. If a product requires more than one person byte, it has to be done by more than one person. So to make products, you typically make them in firms, where you bring different people together, like the accountant, the tax person, the production person, the human resource person, etc. Okay? So we aggregate them in firms. Because that's not enough, we have to aggregate these firms into value chains and so on, so that we spread this, we mobilize things. And so you can ask yourself, when you see a production process, you can ask yourself, how many people need to be involved to make that thing? And you can imagine that, the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker is a British nursery rhyme, but that all these could be family businesses. And you can imagine that the knowledge necessary to run the business can reside in the family. I can assure you that no family can make these products. And you might say that no country can make this product. This product is made by all of these companies across all of these geographies, because the knowledge necessary to make the landing gear is so different from the knowledge necessary to make the turbines, or the toilets, or the carpets, or the avionics, etc., etc. So there's an enormous amount of integration of knowledge that goes into making that product. So it requires a humongous network of collaborators. Well, you can imagine that if now you're going to put tariffs across every transaction, I don't know that planes are going to fly, but anyway. So what I'm talking about is not economies of scale. It's not doing things big, right? Here is a big company. But it's not a company that uses many person bytes, in the sense that it may be using the same person byte. If you move this person here, move him over there, you put that person here, and you bring this person over here, not much will happen. Try to do that same experiment here, and you will hear the difference. Okay? So it means that the product, the symphony, is the product of bringing all of these different skills together. Okay? So that's my description of how the economy, if you want, works. I'm going to try to make it simple by using a metaphor. I'm going to say that production is like a game of Scrabble. You want to make words, and you make words by putting letters together. And these letters are these kind of like atoms of knowledge, right? So Scrabble now looks a little bit like the periodic table I showed you before, right? It's going to be a game of Scrabble. So first element we realize is that if you only have one letter, there aren't too many words you can make. Here you can only make one word. But if I give you these 3 letters, now you can make 4 words, and you can make 3-letter words. If I just give you 1 extra letter, now you can make 9 words, and words that are up to 4 letters long. If I give you these 10 letters, I didn't count this myself, I asked the website of Scrabble, it says you can make 595 words, and if I give you all the letters, then you can make the whole dictionary, right? So these combinations are going to increase more than exponentially, combinatorially, right? So now I want to go back to this picture and ask myself the question, who has more know-how? The person here or the person there? And you say, this is the same story about the Inuit and modern man, right? Because this guy, he knows how to take care of his own bulls, he probably knows how to make his own tools, he probably uses the cow's dung as fertilizer, he uses his own seeds, right? This guy knows how to drive this harvester. He doesn't know how to make a harvester. Making a harvester is like making an airplane. He doesn't know how to make the gasoline for the harvester, right? He doesn't know how to make genetically modified seeds. He probably doesn't know what the term means, right? He doesn't know how to do agrochemicals, insecticides, fertilizers, whatever, right? So, by the way, when this machine breaks down, he knows the phone number of whom to call. Right? So, you cannot say that this guy has more know-how than this guy, but you can say that this guy is mobilizing an enormous amount of knowledge compared to the knowledge mobilized by this guy, right? So he's mobilizing knowledge on how to make harvesters, how to make gasoline, right? So it's the mobilization of knowledge that is behind these differences in productivity, okay? So I'm going to use this as my basic theory of the economy. We call it the theory of economic complexity, because the problem of the economy is how to recombine the knowledge that's dispersed out there, that we've put in different heads. So I'm going to say that the world is going to be made out of these units of capabilities, call them letters, and the world is going to be made out of places, and places are going to be characterized by the letters that they have, and products are going to be characterized by the letters that they need, okay? And as a consequence, a place is going to be, so I have sort of like a place is going to be characterized by the products that it can do given the letters that they have, right? So on the left, you have what we call an endowment matrix. This is what you have. On the right, you have like a technology recipe, what letters you need to make what. And then you're going to make the things for which you have the letters. If you don't have the letters, you cannot make it. Now, if you look at this thing, notice that some places have a lot of letters, some places have few letters. Some products use many letters, some products use few letters. So notice the place that has a lot of letters does all 5 products. They have the letters to make everything. In this. The one that has very few letters can make very few products. In this case, it can only make 1 product, right? So the number of letters you have has something to do with how diversified you are in terms of production, how many different things you can make. But notice the same thing on the other end. The long words require a lot of letters. They can only be done by places that have a lot of letters. And fewer places, the longer the word, the fewer the places that have what it takes to make it. So we call the number of products that a place makes, we call it the diversity of the place. But the number of places that make a product, we call it the ubiquity of the product, how many places can make it. So long words are low ubiquity. They are made in few places. Short words, they can be done in many places. Okay? So if this is the case, I should observe that the places that have a lot of letters simultaneously make a lot of things, and things that are made in few places. And places that have few letters, they make few things, and things that are made in many places. So that's our hypothesis. So let's check the world. So this is the data for the world. On the x-axis is how many products you make, and on the y-axis is how many other countries make the things that you make. And you find that all the rich countries are here, they make many things and things that are done in few places, and poor countries are here, they make few things and things that are done in many places. They make hats, short words, right? And this is if you compare across countries. But let me compare across municipalities. For example, these are municipalities in Chile. That's, the municipalities around Santiago. They make everything and things that are done in few places. And here's where the penguins live in Chile. These are states in Mexico. These are cities in Turkey. Same story, Istanbul, Izmir, Ankara. By the way, there are 500 industries in Istanbul that don't exist in Ankara. So, and here's the poor southeast region. And these are departments in Colombia. So I've tried to show you that there's something about what is it that you know how to do that's very central to how rich you are. Now, you were going to tell me, okay, tell me how to get more letters. Right? Obvious question. And I'm going to say that to get more letters, you have to solve this perennial chicken and egg problem. But I know that some of you are going to complain that this is a rooster, not a chicken. But now, what's the problem? That you have to somehow coordinate the appearance of a letter with the demand for that letter into new words. If you say, I want to diversify, I want to make new things, but things for which I didn't have the letters. So I say, I want to make watches. Well, if you want to make watches, you need watchmakers. But how are you going to find a watchmaker in a country that doesn't make watches, or in a place that doesn't make watches? And how do you become a watchmaker in a place that doesn't make watches? So how do you solve this chicken and egg problem? And we found a way in which history has found a way around this chicken and egg problem. And that has to do with this classification problem. This classification problem is, tell me which two animals are sort of like related and which one is out of the group. Okay? Now people tell me often that the lion and the zebra are from Africa. Others tell me that the zebra eats grass, and the lion and the bear don't eat grass. They are a different trophic level, they call that in biology. But those are not the theories I'm expounding. I'm expounding on the Scrabble theory. And in the Scrabble theory, a zebra is just a bear with an extra Z. So if you want to go from bear to zebra, you just need one letter. If you want to go from bear to lion, you start with 4 letters that you don't have, and you start with 4 letters that you don't need, and you need 4 letters that you don't have. Okay, so bear to lion is very far away. Bear to zebra is short in letter space. Okay? So we got that intuition that some transitions are short and some transitions are large. And here I'm going to completely change metaphors. And I'm going to assume that technology is like a forest, where every product is like a tree. And trees that are together, are close in the forest, they kind of share the same letters. So the bear tree and the zebra tree, that's a funny metaphor, but anyway, are sort of close to each other, and the bear and the lion are far away from each other in the forest. And what I need is a map of the forest. Okay, I need a map of the forest. And so we found essentially a way to map out this forest. And this is some work we did published in 2007, where every circle here is a product, and it's connected to other products if they kind of share the capabilities. If you have what it takes to make one, you can more or less redeploy those capabilities to make the other. If you know how to make shirts for men, maybe you can make blouses for women. My father would say, don't ever do that. These are 2 different tastes, 2 different markets, 2 different price points. Don't try. But anyway, here are kind of garments. Here are construction materials. These are machines. These are chemicals. These are electronics. And so that's the shape of the forest. Some parts are very close to each other. In other parts, the trees are more far apart. It has a shape. We've now reconverted this into this map, which doesn't have the lines, but so now we have the map of the forest. Okay? Now, what is a country? Or what is a state? Or what is a city? I'm going to say that a country is a collection of people who know how to make some things. So it's a collection of firms that know how to make some things. So in the metaphor, a firm is going to be a monkey that lives on a forest. It lives in a tree in the forest. Okay? And then the question to characterize, say, a country is, where in the forest do you have your monkeys? So this is the forest of the whole technology space. What is it that you know how to do? I'll put a monkey wherever you know how to do something, okay? So where are the monkeys? And here is the map for my home country, Venezuela. So what you see in gray, we don't have a monkey there. What you see in color, we have a monkey there, okay? So a lot of gray, very little color. So it means my home country doesn't know how to make many things, okay? So let's compare Venezuela to Rafael's Mexico. Oh, that's Mexico. It has much more color. Okay? And And that's great. Maybe it's because Mexico has 4 times the population of Venezuela. So let's compare Mexico with a small country, say like Austria. Okay? This is Austria. It has even more color than Mexico. Okay? So it's not about size. It's not about size. So again, this is Mexico, this is Austria. Okay? So okay. So now we want to say, do these monkeys move, or are they there and do they move? Do they jump? Right? The diversification process is the monkeys conquering the forest. Going from where they are to other places, conquering the forest. Okay, so let me go very quickly through this. I'm going to compare Ghana with Thailand. And these are 2 countries that back in 1962 started with more or less the same level of income. But Ghana increased their education more than Thailand. So Ghana made more progress in education than Thailand, and education in Ghana is in English, education in Thailand is in Thai. So you might say, well, there are more people in the world that speak English. So what did Ghana know how to do in 1962? Well, cocoa beans, some other saw logs, conifers, and manganese, etc. So that's what they were doing. And this is Thailand. They were doing more things, but same colors. All these agricultural products, essentially, but relatively similar things. This is where they were in the product space. So now I'm putting deeper densities where they had a monkey, okay? I'm going to pass you a movie. Now you have to pay a lot of attention to see the monkeys move, okay? So this is 1965, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, 2000, 2005, 2010. Did you see something? Let me pass it now slowly. So 65, 70, now you get suddenly, between 65 and 70, you get a couple of monkeys in this garments cluster here. By 75, look, more monkeys in the garments cluster. Ooh, now they take even more of the garment cluster, they start to move here in the agro-processed food cluster, and now you have 2 monkeys here in the electronics cluster, and boom, now they conquered the whole electronics cluster, and they're all here, and they're starting to appear some ones here in the machinery cluster in the center. So you see a lot of action in Thailand. You don't see that action in Ghana, okay? So this was Ghana in 1962. This is Ghana in 2010. So 62, 2010, there is some change, manon tropo, not too much, right? And if you look at exports per capita, they are sort of like, in constant dollars, they didn't go anywhere. If anything, they fell in Ghana. If you look at Thailand, this was Thailand in 1962. Look at the colors, okay? This is Thailand in 2010, okay? So it's a complete transformation. And these are the exports of Thailand in this period. So they went from $50 per capita in constant prices to $2,500 per capita. So it's 50x, okay? And that's not because they went to school more, right? That's not because they spoke more English, right? That's because the monkeys colonized the forest, okay? So if you look at income per capita, now Thailand is about 7 times Ghana in terms of GDP per capita. They started in a similar place, but they diverged. So that's the mechanism, diversification. Bear to zebra is much easier than bear to lion. You move to nearby trees. The monkeys like to jump, but they need to jump to nearby trees, okay? Now, you can accelerate the process. I mentioned that you cannot make watches without watchmakers, but how do you become a watchmaker if nobody's making watches? Well, it's very hard to get know-how into brains. It's very easy to move brains. It takes 10,000 hours to become good at something. In 24 hours, you can go around the world in an airplane. So it's much easier to move brains than it is to move know-how into brains. We have a lot of work on showing how important human mobility is for the diffusion of technology. And I won't go into that because I don't have time. I have to hurry up, but we can talk about that. So back to the energy and the energy transition, which was the hook, if you want. So yes, you can make more products, more things, but in the process of making them, you're going to mobilize more energy, right? And rich countries use more energy than poor countries. Fortunately, we're figuring out how to do things using less energy. So this is how much energy you need per dollar produced. So we are becoming a little bit more efficient, but not fast enough relative to our growth. And as a consequence, we are increasing our emissions enormously. So this is global emissions. Okay. These emissions are causing climate change. The Earth scientists tell us, and the meteorologists, we have a distinguished meteorologist with us, Mr. Dubbert, and that what matters for the climate is how much CO2 we put out there in the course of history, not in the last quarter and the last year. It's the stock out there. And this is how much each country in the world has contributed to the excess stock of CO2 up there. And here the US is 24% of emissions. Europe is 31% of emissions. China is less than 15% of emissions, even though they are a sixth of the world's population. Okay? So this also means that, so this is the picture of the stock. This is the picture of the annual flows. This is who's currently emitting. I told you that China is historically responsible for less than 15%, but annually now they represent more than 30%. Right? So right now the emissions, the US was, I told you, 24%, but now it's less than 14%. Okay? So the emissions are now going to more developing countries. And it also shows that if you want to stop emissions, no one can stop it on their own. Say, Europe is very gung-ho about stopping emissions in Europe, but if Europe stops its emissions, it will stop 8.3% of global emissions. So we cannot think about the reduction of emissions as something that an individual country can do. They can contribute the decline in their contribution. But this picture is a dramatic picture because I showed you before that rich countries use more energy than poor countries, and as a consequence, rich countries emit more than poor countries. I like this graph very much because in this graph, the x-axis is your population, and the y-axis is your emissions per capita. So the area of these rectangles is how much you emit. So China emits more than the US, so it has a bigger square, but it has a bigger square because China has 4 times the population of the US, but on average, China emits half of the US, more or less, in per capita terms, okay? So the US emits a lot per capita. But if you want to say, oh, India, Africa, etc., you cannot grow because there's global warming. There's global emissions, there's the climate, etc. They're going to tell you, I'm emitting a tenth of what you emit per capita. So, and you want me to stop now when I'm poor? And you want to count what percentage you are stopping emitting when you are up there? So it's kind of like a very hard conversation to have. So the conundrum is, if you want less developed countries to catch up, they need to consume more energy. But that will increase global emissions and accelerate climate change. Now the Paris Accord wants everybody to focus on lowering their emissions. So they have to go every year and say, I am committing myself to emit less next year. Okay, and this is my plan. I'm going to do something to emit less this year. But less developed countries, they already start from much, much lower levels of emissions per capita. So what do you want them to do? So do you want them to put that as their priority? They still haven't universalized education, healthcare, housing, electricity, whatever. So why should they pay the cost? So the process right now, as we have it, is that we have the Kyoto Protocol, then the Paris Agreement, and then these annual COP meetings where we try to convince everybody that everybody should focus on lowering their emissions. You focus on lowering your emissions, you guys focus on lowering your emissions, you over there, you focus on lowering your emissions, and if we all do that, the world would have lowered their emissions. And I want to say that that's part of the solution, but maybe half of the solution. There's a complete other half that is missing. Because for the world to lower its emissions, the world is going to need a lot of stuff. For example, for the world to lower its emissions, it's going to need to electrify everything that can be electrified. It needs to make that electricity in clean ways. It needs to develop fuels that are alternative to the fossil fuels. It needs to stop emitting from manufacturing process. It needs a lot of stuff, okay? So it needs a lot of stuff to lower its emissions. Who's going to make the things that a decarbonizing world will need in order to decarbonize? Who's going to make the things that will enable the world to decarbonize? Well, why not your country? Right? Because if your country were able to make the things that a decarbonizing world is going to need, the more the world wants to decarbonize, the more you sell, the more you grow. So we want to figure out how places can contribute to the decarbonization agenda by producing the enablers of global decarbonization. Okay, so paraphrasing John F. Kennedy, I'm going to say, ask not what your country can do to decarbonize itself, ask what your country can do to decarbonize the world. And I can substitute country for place. What can my city do? So if you say, what is Steamboat Springs going to do to decarbonize itself? Well, if you lower Steamboat's emissions to zero, the world will not notice, the climate will not notice. But maybe you could have a big impact in helping the world decarbonize. Okay, so in some sense, it's a bigger ambition. It's important just to make it more memorable. I watched in COP29 in Baku, and COP28 in the UAE, the Bolivian go up and say, we commit to decarbonize, etc. Bolivia is sitting on the largest lithium mines in the world. They have yet to extract the first ton. Now, what does the world care more? That there's more lithium so we can have more EVs and stop emissions, or that Bolivia lowers their pitiful emissions? So the world is more interested in them helping us decarbonize than them decarbonizing themselves. So I'm going to, that's my idea, if you want. I'm going to propose 5 strategies for growth. I'm just going to mention 2 of them. One is make the enablers of decarbonization. So we're going to need solar panels, EVs, windmills, whatever, batteries, many things, right? So make those things. Second, power shoring. I'm going to explain what it is. It's a non-fossil fuel world is going to be different in this one dimension. I'm not going to say it now. I'm going to let the anticipation build up, right? We might want to capture carbon, and maybe biomass is an interesting way to capture carbon, and let me say it now, it's easier to create biomass in the tropics than in Wyoming. So it may be an opportunity for the tropics. Then there's knowledge that you can produce the knowledge, and then you can sell services to the world. And then you can use the letters that you acquired in the process of developing these things for other things. These letters might go into things that have nothing to do with green. Okay? But you leverage them going forward. So the first one, and here I'm going to alert you, this is a website we've created called Greenplexity. I'm going to show you the link at the end. These are value chains that are involved in the energy transition. Every circle here is a product, and we've developed a technique to figure out where are these products in the product space. So here I have the same product space as I had before, but now I've put in green the things that are here, that go into these things. So you can figure out where is your country, where are your monkeys, which green tree is close to your monkeys. Okay, so that's what we do here. This is, for example, for South Africa, and you can put in the website, this is the name of my country, and it will tell you which things are nearby, are more like bear to zebra, and from those which are sexier, which are more attractive, which might be more impactful for you. So we create these feasibility, attractiveness graphs, so things that are more feasible are more to the right, things that are more attractive are higher up, and you can choose sort of like what industry to move into. Strategy 2 is associated with this feature of oil. Oil is incredibly dense from a weight point of view and from a volume point of view. A kilo of oil, a liter of oil packs an enormous amount of energy. That makes it super cheap to transport. So if a barrel of oil costs $70 in Saudi Arabia, it'll cost $72 in Japan, it'll cost $72 in Amsterdam. So energy has become sort of like a commodity that's completely, you cannot, having energy does not increase your comparative advantage in things. So for example, you would have expected that if you're energy rich, you make energy intensive products. If you're energy poor, you don't make energy intensive products. So for example, steel, you need a lot of energy to make steel. You would expect that steel is made by countries that have a lot of oil. Well, you look at who exports steel, and it's China, Japan, South Korea, Germany, Belgium. Who imports oil? China, Japan, Korea. So they are importing the energy to make energy-intensive products. You don't have to have the energy to make energy-intensive products, you just bring it in. That's because oil has that characteristic that makes it super cheap to transport. Natural gas is not like that. Natural gas is super complicated to transport. If you wanted to transport natural gas, in normal state, a kilo of natural gas has a lot of energy, but it will occupy this whole room. So if you want to move it, you'll have to condense it. But condensing uses energy, and then you have to liquefy it. It uses that more energy. And then you have to put it in little chips like this. So moving LNG is orders of magnitude more expensive than moving oil. And moving hydrogen is even more expensive than moving oil, right? So as a consequence, natural gas does not have the same price everywhere. It's super cheap in the US, it's super expensive in Europe. And as a consequence, if your company, your industry relies on natural gas, if you don't have it, you cannot hold onto the industry. Well, a green world is going to be even more like that. It's going to be, you need the energy you need the energy there. So what I think is going to happen is not that we're going to send the energy to where the companies are, it's the companies that will have to move to where the energy is. And now the energy is in places that have, for example, a lot of sun, or a lot of wind, or ideally a lot of co-located sun and wind, or a lot of hydro, right? So then that's going to be another avenue for countries to grow. They need to develop their green energy resources, not because they want to use the energy themselves, it's because they want to supply the world in ways that the world cannot do it unless those green energy resources are developed. Let me finish by saying 2 words about policy. Where does policy come into my story? Well, you've all heard about the invisible hand of the market that arranges the world on its own. I can tell you how difficult it was for me to find a picture of an invisible hand. But But the invisible hand of the market says markets can self-organize. So they self-organize and they do it themselves because they have this invisible hand that has sort of like three components. It has a price mechanism. Every product has a price. It allows you to know how much things cost and how much people are willing to pay for things and so on. It's produced by profit-motivated firms, and these firms, they want to make money, and they make money by maximizing the difference between the cost of the inputs that they used and what people are willing to pay for things. So they create value by finding these gaps between what things cost to produce and what people are willing to pay for them. But these profits, which are a calculation on prices, are not just a calculation. They are an incentive to respond to the information that is in prices. And then financial people are trying to lend money to people who are expected to be profitable, and they're expected to be profitable because they are seen as correctly responding to the information contained in prices. So that's the magic of the invisible hand. So if that's the world, who needs a state? Who needs policy? Who needs to intervene? Well, the problem in the world is that things are not only made with things that can be bought in the market, they are made also with public goods. And so here is a car. You can buy this car in the market, but the market doesn't produce roads. The market doesn't produce traffic lights. The market doesn't produce traffic signs. The market doesn't produce traffic rules, traffic cops. So this technology has to live in a space that is full of public goods. And these public goods can be of any kind. You know, nobody can offer the transmission of electricity if they're not allowed to put transmission lines all over the place. You have to decide on standards. Is it 120 volts, 220 volts? You can buy a headset, but somebody has to define property rights over the spectrum. Because if there are no property rights on the spectrum, you know, we won't be able to hear each other. You have to allocate different parts of the spectrum to different places. So if you want to sell newspapers, people better be able to read them. But what's the national language and how is it written and so on? That's a public good that governments have to produce. You can have a Central Park, no, as a public good. But what is the characteristic of public goods? Well, first of all, they don't have prices. There's no price for the traffic light. There's no price for the road. You don't pay for the road. You don't pay for the traffic cop. You don't pay for the right to transmit electricity. So these public goods have no prices. There's no profit motive in principle. The profit motive in the public sector is what we call corruption, right? Okay? And there is no automatic resource mobilization mechanism to move things around. So public goods don't have the invisible hand, and that's why they can become problems. So if you want to think about this problem in Scrabble terms, there are some letters, call them consonants, that you can buy in the market. But you also need a bunch of vowels, and those are the public goods provided by the state. So every product is some combination of public goods and private goods. The public goods don't have the invisible hand. So you can get stuck because you are not providing the public goods that the technology needs. As you may have seen, Europe is full of high-speed rail. China is full of high-speed rail. There's no high-speed rail in the US. And that's because the public goods have not been provided to be able to deploy that technology, right? So you know, markets have prices, profits, and capital markets. Maybe public goods have lobbying. What's the incentive to respond to information? Maybe campaign contributions, and then these guys are in the Ways and Means Committee. So this is the swamp, okay? But it's the thing that was invented to make the government a little bit more responsive to the need to provide public goods. It can be corrupted, it can be, I'm not proposing it, I'm just describing it. So what is policy about? It's about sometimes taxing negative externalities like pollution with maybe carbon taxes, or positive externalities like technology spillovers by R&D subsidies, R&D tax deductions, and so on. Solving chicken and egg problems in markets, especially in new markets, and providing the complementary goods, the vowels that go with the consonants that are needed to adopt new technology. So economic development is about adoption of technology. Technology is knowledge. It's expressed in tools, codes, and know-how. This know-how is the hardest one to move. It exists in teams of brains, not in individual brains, because it's spread out. We have to bring these brains together. Societies accumulate knowledge by putting different bits of knowledge in different heads. But expanding the knowledge that a place has involves these chicken and egg problems, which cause progress to be parsimonious. Monkeys jump short distances. You have to find paths in the forest to try to move to the next thing. Countries differ in their ability to, where you start affects where you can move to. And know-how enters the process through an infection process. Immigration can be a very important accelerant. Immigration, return migration, diasporas, FDI, foreign direct investment, can be important. Even we have a paper showing that business travel is important in the diffusion of technology. So, and if the world tries to decarbonize, maybe you should figure out ways in which you can supply the needs of a world that wants to decarbonize, and that may become your next avenue of growth. Thank you guys very much.
So, thank you very much, Ricardo. Thanks for your interesting presentation. So we have some questions from the audience that I would like to ask. And here's one of them. So the first question reads, research suggests that decarbonization will dramatically reshape where industry locates globally. So what does this geographic reshuffling mean for places like Colorado, which has both fossil fuel heritage and renewable energy potential? How should regions prepare for this transition?
That's a great question. I think hydro potential is something that eventually will demand a premium because it's greener. I think a decarbonizing world will need a lot of critical minerals. This is a mining place. I think we cannot save the atmosphere without scratching the earth. That's a trade-off. There's a lot of the old products of, when you mine, I'm going to say a redundancy, when you mine a mine, you extract some of the metal, which typically has 1%, 2%, 3% concentration, and you leave the rest. I forget the name in English of the rest, the slag or whatever. Right? Well, those things are full of minerals that now we find valuable that we may want to reprocess. We might improve on our technologies to reprocess these things, but that's definitely something that this part of the U.S. might contribute. And then there's just knowledge that, there's an enormous amount of photons coming from the sun, and we are converting them into energy at very low efficiencies. And so there's a lot of knowledge to be developed, and you have excellent universities in Colorado and more generally in the U.S. that might create the breakthroughs that allow us to crack open this energy transition. So I think that maybe in the past you would not have put the accent on these things because you're not anticipating these new industries to emerge, but in the context of the new industries, you want to know it reshuffles the game. For example, we worked with South Africa, with Namibia, with Morocco. We're working now with Morocco. These are places that have co-located sun and wind. Namibia has the Namibian desert. You would say, oh, what a pain, we have a desert. Morocco is quite desertic also. So, it's not good for agriculture, right? Well, guess what? It's fantastic for the sun, right? It's a desert because there are no clouds around, right? So suddenly it becomes an asset, and we're trying to figure out ways in which this thing that you always had now can become an asset. So I think you need to reimagine yourself and asking yourself, given what I have and given what the world is going to need, how can I make them match?
Thank you. So here's another question. Can you speak to the environmental impacts of artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence impact your theories?
Well, I mean, it's obvious that artificial intelligence is having an enormous effect on energy demand. So there is a humongous increase in energy demand. I think the artificial intelligence companies are not very price sensitive. So if we push them a little bit, they might invest in greener technologies and maybe facilitate more investment in green technologies, and maybe that's going to accelerate technological improvements in greener energies. But more importantly, I think that artificial intelligence could very dramatically change the world from what it is now to a quite different world. As you heard me speak, the core of my story is in the fact that tools and codes are easy to move around, and know-how takes this long process to accumulate. Well, if you train an LLM, making copies of an LLM doesn't take you 10,000 hours of training. So artificial intelligence is like moving know-how from the brain to the machine. So it's like putting it in the tool. And that can, enormously expand the set of possibilities. If you think about it, the reason why the movie industry is so concentrated in Los Angeles is because at the end of a movie, the next 10 minutes of the movie is just the credits, right? This is sound editing, video editing, special effects, casting, I don't know. You can go on and on, right? Well, each one of that is a letter. So a movie is a very long word. So you can only make movies in places that have all the letters. And so the more complex industries have to go to very large cities because that's where you can put together all the necessary letters. If now many of those letters go into the machine, then smaller places can start making things that were impossible before. So it could reshape things very significantly. It could accelerate things very significantly. And it's going to increase energy demand by a lot, and we need to figure out if we use that to accelerate the energy transition or to accelerate global warming. And it's a little bit up to us to shape it.
Thank you very much. And a question a little bit more local. So the audience said, here in the Yampa Valley, we have amazing interstate grid infrastructure due to the nearby coal plants. But that infrastructure will be compromised when these mines close. So our valley should have a momentum on renewable development, but it seems not to be enough. So what policy frameworks help regions like ours capture these green growth opportunities instead of letting potential inefficiencies to compromise comparative advantages?
I come from Venezuela. Venezuela is an oil country. And Venezuela became rich because of oil. Venezuela will have to figure out a different future after oil ends. As Minister Ahmed Zaki Yamani from Saudi Arabia said that the Stone Age did not end because of a lack of stones. And so that the oil age will not end because of a lack of oil. It's just that we'll find better ways of doing energy, and the challenge is to accelerate that. So I would say you have coal, you have many other minerals. There's a lot of minerals that are involved in the energy transition. Just have to look for them. And then you have to also look for their use, because John D. Rockefeller developed the oil industry in the US decades before they invented the internal combustion engine. So oil was only used for lighting, kerosene. And it took the invention of the internal combustion engine to create the market for gasoline. And that allowed his knowledge of oil to expand. So there's a lot of technological innovation in what kinds of rare earths, what kinds of metals you can put in membranes that allows you to separate metals or separate minerals and extract minerals from stuff. There's a lot of potential technological innovations that can increase enormously the value of your mineral resources. And not only if you develop that knowledge, it will be good. I mean, if you own the mineral resources there in Colorado, they will become more valuable, but that technology itself will become super valuable globally. So I think that there's a lot for mineral countries, mineral technology to mining technologies and mining extraction, mining refining, to improve mining use. There's a lot of work on fuel cells and electrolyzers and things like that. Their efficiency has to do with the physical chemistry of the membranes and so on. There's a lot of work to be done there. And you have the hydro. It is true that small places, for all places, their exports, the things that you can do there and sell outside of there, those are the things that bring money into your place, and that's the engine of your growth. So you have to think of what are the things that you can do here that you can export. Obviously, steamboat exports experiences, right? Skiing, right? Education, right? So you export. So these places that are going to be hit by mine closings. By the way, mines have closed forever in Colorado and in the West, and that's why you have so many ghost towns in the west of the U.S. So the mines die even if the mining industry as a whole doesn't die. So our mine dies, and the local community gets affected. So what you really want to focus is in figuring out activities that can quote unquote export from your place. And look around, sometimes you bring in people from, new ideas come from somewhere else, and they develop in a place because the place was, because the people developed it there. I mean, the reason why Microsoft is in Seattle is because Bill Gates grew up there, and he eventually went back because he wanted to be back home, but there was nothing about Seattle per se, right? So, that's why diasporas and return diasporas are so important and for small places to change their history. And you have the ability to attract so much talent from the country, people who come to retire here. They are super full of knowledge, super full of connections, super full of ideas. I think that you have to transform that into an asset.
Ricardo, thank you very much for your great presentation and for the Q&A session. So please join me in giving a round of applause to Ricardo Hausmann. So I just would like to wrap up this event by Ricardo, and also by thank all of you for being here. These events are public policy related, are non-partisan, and are free for the public. Thanks for your contribution, your support to the seminar. So we would like to invite to pretty much keep continuing these efforts, because this is what makes Steamboat special. As Ricardo mentioned, the human capital, the community capital, and the intellectual capital is in this room. Thank you very much.